Hello, everybody. You're very, very welcome to join us here tonight. And I really appreciate you coming along tonight. It's not easy to join in sessions like this. We're going to talk about some issues that can be very personal and very challenging. So I just want to start by reassuring you that anybody who's participating as an attendee cannot be seen or heard on this webinar. The only people you will see are the speakers. And tonight it'll be mainly myself, Maura Keating, who looks after the ICBN, and my chairperson, Brid, Carroll. So we'll be the main faces you will see. We also have two people as backup team, Amanda and Lorraine, and they're going to look after the chat and the Q&A function as well. So they're the only names that will be mentioned. If you have a question that you want to pose to us later on in the discussion, you can do that anonymously, and we will try and address as many as we can. And obviously we won't share any personal details. So just to reassure you in that, we're also recording the session, and we're doing that because sometimes listening in on this type of information and this level of information can be a bit daunting and overwhelming. And sometimes it's just too much to take in one sitting. So what we're going to do is we're recording the session, and then afterwards you will get an email from us. Everybody who's registered will get an email from us with a copy of the recording, so you can look back at it in your own time, and also a link or references to any information or resources that we have mentioned during the discussion. So that's just by way of kind of, I suppose, the housekeeping side of the introductions. As I said, we are going to talk about a subject that can be quite challenging, but really, you know, having conversations with your children about grief and loss, you know, they are challenging for any adult, but they are important conversations. And sometimes getting a little bit of guidance, a little bit of, you know, hearing from other people how to have these conversations and what to expect in terms of the emotions and how to normalize what you're going through can be very helpful, because it really is very important that we talk openly to children about these big, hard issues, because it's very hard for them to understand and get their head around it if we don't explain it to them. So we're going to share some information, some guidance. The format of the night, we're not going to overwhelm you with slides or loads of data like that. It's really just going to be a conversational discussion. We're going to start off with an overview and a talking you through the journey from our chairperson, Brid Carroll. Brid has vast experience in the area of childhood bereavement. She's worked across as a bereavement liaison officer. She's worked across childhood bereavement. She's been the coordinator of the Children in Loss programme in the Royal College of Surgeons and the Irish Hospice Foundation for 15 years. So Brid, and she's a psychotherapist in her own right as well. So Brid has a lot of experience in this area, has dealt with many, many families. And, you know, any of you who've met Brid or have had the pleasure of hearing Brid talk before, you know, she's a very warm and open person. And I suppose the tone of what we want to do tonight is to just share with you any knowledge and information we have, and to be available for you over the next hour and a half. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Brid, and Brid's going to talk through some issues. And after Brid's talk, I'm going to show a short little video, and then we're going to have some questions. So if you have questions and you want to put them into the Q&A function, we'll try and look at them later on. Okay,
Thank you very much, Maura. Can you hear me loud and clear?
I can hear you nice and clear, yeah.
That's okay. Thank you very much. You're welcome, everybody. I know it's always difficult to come to a session like this, so it's actually, we're looking at the loss side of our journeys at this stage tonight. So let's be gentle with ourselves and gentle with the topic as we go. And I suppose our theme this year for Bereaved Children's Awareness Week is holding the hope and making bereaved children and young people visible. And really why that came about is that, unfortunately, due to COVID in the last 2 years, so many of our young people and children were actually excluded from funerals and the rituals and the rites of passage when it came to end of life. And that has been very, very difficult for so many families. And, you know, we've all received so many, those working in the profession have received so many calls over the last 2 years from parents, really concerned about, you know, how am I going to talk to my children? What am I going to say? And there's a sense of panic in it and almost like an urgency. And one of the things that we look at tonight is actually, one of the first things is, let's just slow it down, because grief in children is not a once-off event. It's something that happens to them in childhood, but in fact, they are going to meet their loss many times along the path of life. Various milestones along the way, right up through their own lifestyle, into whatever jobs they may do in the future, or the courses that they take, into their marriage and so on, and even perhaps even having their own first children, will really bring back those losses at different points. So the thing about it is, it's actually tonight, let's give you some information that can be helpful to you in supporting them and letting you see, you know, that their journey through grief and loss is very different than our own. So in fact, if we are the adult who has had the loss in the last number of years, or even pre-COVID, and are still concerned about our children, the thing about it is that we're going through a grieving process ourselves too. And I think it's most important that actually we need to have some information on how that's going to actually affect us. Information that will just, you know, that somebody says, well, this is quite normal and this is how it goes. And I know Maura will be talking about a lot of resources later in the night, but I know there's a lovely new resource has come out of St. Francis Hospice in Raheny, and it's one on finding your way through grief. And certainly I've heard many already who have had their hands on it actually say, you know, that makes an awful lot of sense of it from the adult perspective too. So it might be a good one to hook into. I'll leave it to Maura to say more about that later. And the thing about it is, so often we're inclined to sort of seek professional support for our children, feeling that, you know, if my children were okay, I'll be okay. And of course, the response we will often give is, put on your own oxygen mask first. In other words, inform yourself a little bit, get yourself that little bit strong. And actually, as you gain your strength, then you can reach out to your children and really be the support that they need. Know one thing, that you know your children better than anybody. But some of the things that you mightn't have thought about in terms of children and grief is that we ourselves as adults, we wade through that river of grief, and it takes us time to come out to the other side of it. It could take us a couple of years, even a little bit longer. It depends on the urgency. Perhaps we're so invested in actually rearing these children that in fact, it may take us years before we can give ourselves time to truly grieve the loss that we've had. And often I say, I think dads and men folk can be great in that they come back to it and say, well, I reared the children and now it's my time and I'm doing this as self-care for myself. So the thing about it is of realizing that while we wade through that river, children splash in it like puddles. Grief is too heavy for a child to actually carry all of the time. So the thing about it is it will come up and then it will disappear. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a few moments. That's how they grieve differently from us. The other thing that we need to be so conscious of is that they actually protect us as parents. Even the youngest of them, down to 2-3 years of age, actually hide their feelings because they're afraid we're hurting too much. And they will actually protect us. And as professionals working with them, they will often tell you, you know, mum and dad don't know that I know this, but actually, and they turn around and it's like, I haven't told them. So it's actually one of the things of looking at it and realizing, you know, you don't have to mind us as your parents. We're here to mind you. And that can be hard. They hate being excluded. And one of the things that we need to be so aware of is that they're very curious creatures. And how many children will say, oh, well, I knew there was something wrong. Oh, I overheard that telephone call. And, you know, you don't realize that so often the ear is glued to the door or they're at the top of the stairs listening. And it's actually being aware of that they are much more aware of what's happening because they will pick up the atmosphere at home when something is wrong. even if it's the death is imminent and somebody is seriously ill, they're picking up that atmosphere and they need information from us. And really the people to give them that information is ourselves as parents and carers of these children. Certainly, it's the hardest conversation you will ever have with your children in your lifetime. But if we think about it this way, you know, we really do not want to throw the children down the stairs at the end of life. We're in a rush and a panic. We're sort of saying, oh gosh, you know, this is what's happening. And we're telling them now at the very end, when there isn't opportunity for goodbyes, but there isn't opportunities to actually have that last piece of a conversation. And the thing about it is, if we actually give them information through an illness, step by step along the way, just little chunks, little bite-sized pieces along the way, it's preparing them so that at the end, this doesn't come as a massive surprise out of the blue and knocks them absolutely sideways. So we gently bring it step by step when we're giving them the information. Children, unlike ourselves, can be very honest and frank. They think in concrete terms, and by golly, they can send scud missiles at you some days, because they'll ask a question completely out of the blue, throw you completely as a parent, and you're left reeling. And the thing about it is, and one clear thing that I will say to you is, if a child asks a question, you can be sure they're ready for the answer, because they've been mulling it in their head before they put it out there to you. You may not know the answer immediately. And one of the things I would say to you is, don't falsify it, don't fluff it, don't turn around. Just say, actually, I can't give you the answer to that right now, but actually I'll check it out and I'll come back to you and I'll give you the information then. And that's how you can be totally honest with your children. You can bide for time, be straight with them, because they want you to be the truth teller for them. They want you to be the person that they can come back to over and over again to ask the questions. And the thing about it is, if we actually stall on the very first one, we can really, you know, they need one trusted adult that will guide them through this journey. And as parents, if we can be that trusted adult, fantastic. If in fact our grief is overwhelming us so much that we can't actually be that in the beginning, it's really worthwhile to have a family member as a support person, that third party, somebody the child really gets on with, maybe the childminder, but somebody there that can have those little conversations with them if they ask the question. And of course, the child feels more at ease to ask the question there sometimes because they don't have to protect that person. So having that other person with you on the journey is really important. And when we look at it, you know, we need those natural supports. We need it as adults too, because we need our family and friends and the community to help us get through this loss. And as I said, you know, one of the things that we find is that the children belong to a family. So we need to be careful of the scripts that we give them. You know, be honest, be open, communicate, use the name of the person who has died, almost as if they're still with us, and they are with us in essence. And it will help us in the journey too, but it will allow the freedom to be able to talk. Sometimes, unfortunately, we see families where people will say, oh, we don't talk about that anymore in our house. And that is a script of silence that we condemn everybody else in the household to, even our children. So we need to be aware of that. The other thing that we find is, you know, that we are the role models of grief to our children. And so often, you know, and I'm quite sure you think of it and think, you know, so often people will actually say, well, actually, I hide my tears from them. I shed my tears in the shower, or I sneak into the bathroom, or I go into my own room and I have a good cry. But if we can laugh with our children, why can't we cry with them? And in fact, if they don't learn how to model grief from us, their parents and carers, where on earth are they going to find it? There will be no path. There will be no way of knowing. So we are role models of how one actually healthily grieves. And I think that's really important for us as we move through. As I said, the grief is actually very different from ours. And the thing about it is that splashing in puddles. I've heard many a poor dad turn around and say to me, oh, good God, why is it always bedtime? And that's one of the things that, in fact, just like ourselves, that when the busyness of the day has gone, we're in the quiet of the evening, all these thoughts come bubbling up again. And of course, it's the time to sit with them at bedtime, and then they put out all of the things that are worrying them. So it's actually, perhaps maybe we need to actually bring that forward to a time where we'll just have a little bit quiet time to have a chat earlier in the evening, before it's bedtime. And then everybody can settle more gently. When it comes for them, it's intermittent. It's not there all of the time. It is intense, and one almost thinks that, oh my goodness, you could actually have a child who will cry for a whole hour. And suddenly their pal comes to the door and says, is Keane coming out to play hurl? And Keane's gone out the door, and you as a parent are left bewildered going, what happened there? But that's children. The distraction will take them away. When they're upset like that, it's really important to be able to say, there's days when I feel like that too. Letting them know that, okay, it's okay to feel like this because mum or dad feel like this too. So, and they come through. And I know there will be days when you actually have to reassure them, but maybe on the inside you're not feeling too strong in yourself. But it's the piece of being able to say, somehow we'll all get through this together. You mightn't know how right in that moment, but just trust. And I can guarantee you that I have actually worked with so many families that I watch even the worst of disasters turn into growth and into life again. And in that coming to life again, a connection with the one that they have lost. And that's really, really important. It's the essence that stays with us and can travel with us through the rest of their days. Children's grief gets triggered by, the lack of activities, perhaps. And remember that they themselves can pull themselves out of activities when they're in grief for a period of time. It's not unusual. I think of a young boy talking about, oh, I don't like to play football anymore because dad was the one that was always on the sideline. And now he's gone, it's actually a question of, what actually happens is that I might hear somebody else whistling on the sideline and I suddenly think, oh, that could be dad. And then I get thrown in my match. So it's just become too hard and I don't go. But in fact, perhaps a child like that needs to actually find another activity. So it's actually, activities can be such a release for them in moving through their grief. And it's important that we actually signpost that for them. The time of the day can be one of the things. It could be music, or it could be the lack of an event. We were meant to go see Man United, but now we can't. So it's these pieces that come up. And we have seen the lack of events in children's lives over the last 2 years have brought up high anxiety and worry and concern within them. And it's actually important that we actually console them and comfort them when they are feeling like that. In between times, they seem totally unaffected. You see them out playing, happy, doing the ordinary things in life. And again, the school can be a wonderful monitor for us in relation to that. A child, that is in school, a teacher who has them, who is a good support, can actually watch them in the classroom and watch, are they having a good day, a bad day? Can reassure you, perhaps, if you've made a contact with the school, can reassure you that things are going well, which sometimes as a parent we need, because we begin to wonder, am I doing it right? Is it okay? And that can be really helpful to us. The other thing about it is that we find children who have actually gone through grief and loss really function at a deeper level emotionally. And often they show a maturity that's way beyond their years, looking out for parents, even the youngest of them, 5, 6 years of age, actually doing little jobs around the house. And Mum, you look tired and I'll do that for you this evening. Or Dad, I'll do that job. And really taking on roles. I think as parents, we need to be careful of that one, that we don't want them to take on the role of the deceased parent, but maybe come along and sort of say, let's work as a team here and we'll all work together. We'll have the job done in 5 minutes. And that allows the workloads to be spread within the household. Children can become silent. They can become disenfranchised. Their grief may not be recognized, particularly if it's a sibling that has been lost, because the loss is, the parents are going through the grief for another child, and the paradox of living with trying to care for a healthy child and grieve your lost child can be quite difficult in the early days. And the child can feel a little bit lost in that. And it's just being aware of them and actually pausing and being able to say to them from time to time, how are you actually coping with this at the moment? Not easy for any of us, but how are you actually coping? Not so much how you're feeling, because inside they're wanting to scream at you, don't you damn well know how I'm feeling, but actually, how are you coping? What's difficult this week? And often having those conversations, maybe while you're out for a walk or in the car, where they're not feeling eyeballed, but it's shoulder to shoulder conversations. And it's amazing how much they tell you as they chat along beside you, almost talking into the air and not quite directly at you. So just finding your opportunities in that way. A child's response to death will depend on their age, their connection to the person who has gone, the developmental stage that they're at in life, and how the death occurred. And, you know, other subsequent life events that are going on at the same time. Is there difficulties in school? Are we just about to start school? Are we on the transition into secondary school? All of these different pieces have influences on it. And what support do they have in their grief? Not just you as parent, not just the carer within the home, but within their community of school and sports clubs. Is there another adult there that they can actually, if they're having a bad time, just touch base with and have time out with for a few minutes in the day that can anchor them as they go through? And I suppose it's important for us as parents then to make a connection with the schools and the sports clubs and to be able to say, you know, just keep an eye out on my little one there because this is what's going on, and that the school knows. And it's that initial conversation, as parents have said to me in the past, knowing that the school knows is something that's really helpful for me, because I know if there's a bad issue comes up, I can actually flag it to the school and I know they will be there and that there's a caring, compassionate community that can look out. And the thing about it is the children are spending so much time in schools in their day. So being aware of using it in that way. We see that children will respond emotionally, and every emotion in the book will come up. And again, we will see as well that, you know, they will have a physical manifestation of grief. And so often it shows in the typical ones of children, the tummy aches, right up to teenagers who carry those tummy aches, but make no connection perhaps between the grief they're feeling and the physical symptoms that are in their body. I often think, or it can be the sore throats or the headaches. And just like ourselves as adults, they carry their stress in the parts of their body that it manifests. So maybe the poor old head is so full of thoughts that it's full of headaches. Or actually there's things we need to say and I can't actually say it. And the poor old throat is actually showing it. Or maybe the poor old tummy is the place I hold my stress. Or I'm feeling a tightness across the chest because this is so painful and has heartache in it. So just being aware of how the body speaks and just allowing them to talk about that sometimes. And, you know, when they come along and say, I don't want to go to school and my tummy hurts, and it's just, and I've sort of, you know, well, what's going on there? And what's the little worry that's in there today? And sometimes it's actually the piece that they don't actually express to us, but what might be going on is, well, if I leave, will something happen to anybody else? Because sometimes that's their fear. That if I go to school today, what's going to happen at home when I'm gone? Will everybody be safe and secure? Because their little assumptive worlds and the world's view has now been shattered by this loss. So we need to create a security and a safety for them as they go. We think about it too, that, you know, so many of the younger children have not yet reached a stage where they can understand the permanency of death. I always think of a story told of a 5-year-old in London who lived near Heathrow, and he used to look out the window in the evening and ask his mum, when was Dad coming back? And she couldn't quite fathom what was going on and Dad was a pilot who used to take off from Heathrow in the good old days. And then he turned around and said, well, you've told me that heaven was in the sky, and if Dad could fly in that, can't he fly into the sky and come back again? And it's that lack of ability to understand the permanency yet for them, or that the irreversibility that happens with death, that they get blocked in it. So their thinking may seem skewed to ours, but in fact, it's quite relevant for the age they're actually at. When we turn around and, you know, often in the past, there was this view in Ireland that, oh, the little ones, you know, the preschoolers, they were too young to understand. And sure, what would they know? And one of the things we've come to realize in the world of grief and loss is that, in fact, the youngest child going shows an irritability or an upset at the loss that has happened in the house. They are picking up the atmosphere from the rest of us. Certainly by 2 or 3 years of age. And remember, our children these days are far more advanced than they used to be and very tuned in to everything that's happening. But they have a sense of loss, and where you will see it affecting is actually in sleep and eating patterns, that you suddenly find the sleep and eating patterns, they're restless, or they're wanting to be picked up in the middle of the night, or they're not feeding quite as well as they were. And, you know, again, watching and realizing that, you know, you can see that they're searching, and there's little questions, but they still haven't got the language to ask them really. And we see that they manifest as being clingy and distressed. So many parents will say, my goodness, I can't even go to the bathroom, but they're on my tail. And the thing about it is, you know, what they need is that one sound adult at that stage. And really, you know, the other piece about it, and it's so hard for us as parents at that stage, is they're so teeny and we'd love to fast forward them, but we can't. So in fact, they haven't yet got the language emotionally to express what's going on. So as I said, this is a model that will come up again and again for them. So as they grow a little bit older, they'll start asking the questions. So this journey isn't just going to happen as the preschool age and be forgotten. It's going to actually be revisited over and over again along the way. For those little ones, it's lovely to actually give them cuddles and consistent care and let them play with lots of messy toys so that they can express. Sand and water can be a really good, or paint, and allowing them to paint with finger paint, and that can be a great way to actually release the tension that's there at that early age. For the 3 to 5 year olds, again, we think of them, they're beginning to start school. The other thing that's happening is that developmentally, they're in that stage where they're beginning to develop trust vis-a-vis mistrust. So in fact, stepping out to school is a big thing if you've just had a loss in your life. But they, again, don't understand the permanency. They're confused by all that's going on. And at one level, you know, it may feel like a party, but on the other level, there's so much emotional upset happening. And they want things fixed. Many times we've seen the child at that age come in with a butterfly and ask us to fix it. And the butterfly could be dead. And we realize that we can't. And it's a moment like that that can be a teaching moment for us, that we actually, you know, I often say, even in the play schools, you know, don't replace the goldfish. Let it be a teaching moment and let the children learn that, yes, living things die. And there's so many beautiful books that we can actually use nowadays to actually talk about loss and grief to them. And the thing about it is, we need to tell children that young often about death. You know, they will come back and they will actually, you know, I think of a little one about 5 years of age who, you know, was constantly looking for a bowl going to bed at night because she wanted to be sick. And I remember on a telephone call sort of saying to Mum, what's going on? And she said, oh, you know, her grandma went to hospital and actually was sick in the ambulance, and I actually had to take a bowl going. And she feels the same way. But Grandma never came back from hospital. She had died. And the thing about it is that, you know, that child was beginning to come to a stage that she was sitting in the car with Mum, and it was like, you know, if we sit in this traffic jam long enough, could we die too? If we didn't eat, could we die too? And it's all these type of questions. And what they're trying to do, because they're so small, is they're trying to make sense of this loss. And it's still too big for them to make sense of. And the thing about it is, you know, that's what we need to tell them often. The sense that they feel inside themselves is like a sense of abandonment. This person has left me. And they can't verbalize how that feels because they haven't yet got the emotional language to do so. So we need to be very patient with them, because it's only when they get to the next stage group that they can actually begin to articulate that a little bit more, and they will. So what we find is the separation anxiety. So that piece of going to school can be difficult, or the tantrums. And actually what we realize is that they don't have the language, but they will act out how they're feeling. So we will get it in an acting out. And the other thing that we notice is that they have a lot more coughs and colds, almost as if the little body is wanting attention, and this is how it gets the attention that it needs. So they need routine. They need reassurance that they're going to be okay. And the thing about it is that, you know, we need to realize that they've huge imagination and they can fantasize a lot of things at that stage too. But if we give them simple explanations, work with routines and cuddles, read books about loss, and there's a beautiful one, The Invisible String. And I think for that age group, it's just, I often empower parents to use it with the children at home. And it's even available on YouTube now. So you can actually listen to it with them, the story. And the story is about all the people that you're linked to in life, all the people that there is connection to. And what I often get parents to do is cut out some hearts and cards, different colors, get the children to actually name the people who those hearts belong to, and actually put them on a string and link them, including the person who may be gone now, onto that string, and the child in it as well. And you can actually hang it on the wall for them, that they can actually have it there to look at, so that they can actually see it and realize that they are still connected, even though the person is physically absent to them. So we see that drawing and play at that age can be a huge way to express. The 5 to 9-year-olds, if you think about your children at that age, they are big into magical thinking. And one of the things that becomes a problem in that for them is that sometimes they actually think that perhaps something they said has caused this death to happen, or because they were fighting with their brother or sister, that was why they had the accident. And that in fact, they begin to think that, you know, they're omnipotent at this stage, and that, you know, that they can cause these things. And one of the things we need to check with them is, do you actually feel that you're to blame for this? And realize that nothing you think or nothing you say can actually cause someone to die. And we need to reassure them of that. And we need to reassure them that their feelings are okay now, that they're coming, but we need to find a way to regulate them. How do we calm down again when we've got upset? So again, they think creatively, and they worry about illnesses, and they worry about others in this case, of, you know, can this happen to others too within the family? And they're quite dependent on our responses. So if we can actually be a good model and be strong with them from time to time, that can really help them and reassure them. And the thing about it is, you know, when they talk about, you know, oh, I'm really missing my parent or my brother or my sister, that actually we can say, yeah, we too actually feel like that too, you know, and there are days when I miss them too. And we work together to actually move to a new place. And again, for them, you know, they maybe show fear of the dark, or have nightmares at night. And again, it can be the imagination that has just gone too active, and really that they're just scared in that way. And when we think about it, you know, provide them with a nightlight. Give them special quiet time before bedtime. Give them information when they ask the questions, and lots of cuddles. And again, drawing and books are reliable for them. And maybe pushing it a little bit further, even a pet can help, because so often children at that age just can turn to their pet and, in fact, offload a huge amount to their pet that they never say to you or I. And then we think of the early pre-teeners, you know, not even the pre-teeners, but the early teenagers at this stage, from 9 to 12 years of age. And they understand the finality of death. These are the ones that begin to show more anxiety, because they realize life isn't quite a safe place as it used to be. And in fact, that message has come through, sadly, so solidly to them in the last 2 years. They're fearful for themselves and for somebody else. And in fact, in that early teenage stage, when they're going into secondary school, they may want to just deny that the loss is happening, because they want to be like their friends. They don't want to stick out in the crowd. And they want to get on with life and not actually have to. And I suppose one of the privileged things that they have is that they have life to get on with. If we have lost a partner or a spouse, we may be grieving the past we've had, but our children still have a future to look forward to and a future to focus to. So they may move forward in that way. And they can be anxious and panic and have difficulty getting to sleep, or wakening in the middle of the night, and suddenly you find them at the foot of your bed needing to get in. And the thing about it is, you know, it's good to talk to them clearly about feelings. and of realizing that they're not too fragile, that we all have feelings like this. And the thing about it is, work out little tasks that we can do together, treats that we can have together. Make a memory jar or a memory book, and look at photographs and show affection to them. And use calming music or some of the lovely meditation tapes that we can have for children at night to help them sleep. And to give them information when needed. If they ask, they're ready to hear, and we need to give them that information. The 12 to 14-year-olds, they're into second year in secondary school, middle teens up to transition year. The thing about it is, they will have difficulty in accepting the death and talking about it. And it's not unusual for that group in particular to put their grief on hold and not actually address it until they're quite older, late into teens, even into young adult life, that it's only then that they really truly give the time to look at the grief and the impact of what it was in their lives. And I often think at that stage, it's almost like the older self goes back to take the younger self by the hand and move them forward into life. So just being aware of that we don't need to push them or probe them or force them. They will actually bloom into being one with their grief when they are ready to do so. So it comes in a developmental way. We see then that, they need to have information. They still need affection at that stage and lots of physical activity. And, it's actually the piece of actually taking them away from some of the screens and devices, and actually, even if it's to go off and say, right, we're going to go geocaching today, or we're going to actually go on a bit of a hike, or we're going to go to the beach, and we're going to actually go beachcombing today. Just something simple, but something that gets them outdoors. And my goodness, they come alive, because suddenly it's like, oh, this is a whole new experience, and it can be really beneficial to them. And these are the ones that can reminisce with you. And again, that can be really healthy for both yourself and for the children themselves. And we see as they get a little bit older that they actually begin to understand a lot more their grief and maybe come up with the bigger questions in life. Why do people die? Why wasn't my dad or my sister or my brother or my parent or my granddad, why did they actually die at this point? Why did they happen to be one of the people that went? And we need to remember that they need choice. Choice to do things, choice not to. That gives them a sense of control. They need information in the size of pieces that's appropriate for their age. I always think of jigsaw puzzles when I think of that, and think, we give the little puzzle to the smaller child, but the bigger one can actually take the 1,000 piece. So information is given in that measure, as much as a child can take on at that point. Don't overload them with information. It's not needed. They need involvement, something that will give them a sense of control. If there is somebody ill, it's like the piece of, well, you can give them the water. And they feel, and it really stands to them in grief afterwards, well, I had a job to do, and this was my task. And that gives them a sense of control. Give them reassurance. They need a routine. So actually, sometimes we actually, allow a real free for all type of thing when we're going through grief with them. And in fact, they far rather structure. They like to know what the boundary is and how they can operate within it. They need loads of affection. And we need to acknowledge their feelings. The day that they come in from school, slam the door, and they're letting fly over some teacher teaching some subject that didn't hear them today, and they go into their room. And for us, be proactive, not reactive. Leave them for a while. Then have the conversation. Ask them what's happening. I notice you're hurting this evening. What's been happening? And open the conversation. And allow them to express those feelings. And they need role models. So in fact, if they have lost a father figure, if there is somebody in the extended family or in the support network that can be a role model, a male role model, that's really important. If it's mother figure that has gone, it's the same. That, it could be a sister, it could be an aunt, it could be the childminder, but again, the role models, particularly we see it within early teens and that, because these are the people who liberate them into the roles in life. And they need time to remember and reminisce. And do remember this, that it's only a very small number of children who actually need outside support. And the red flags that we notice for this is if they have persistent anxiety, if there's persistent aggression that is actually becoming violent and lashing out, if there's social withdrawal from friends and activities that they just, and even school, that they just do not want to engage, or the self-guilt or blame about the death. And we need to ask the question. And again, remember, it could be a death that was way back at that 8-9-year-old age. If the self-destructive behavior like risk-taking or self-harming or suicide behavior, all of these, and particularly the latter three, need immediate intervention. They have stories to tell. They need to be able to tell the story of the event that has happened. They need to tell the story of the relationship they had with the person who has died, especially if it was a close relationship to them. They need to tell the story of the love and the legacies that were handed on from the person who has gone. And in time, they will be able to tell their story of adjustment. And this can be done in many different ways. Again, a wonderful book that's out at the moment is one of You Will Be Okay. Julie Stokes, who has actually a founder of Winston's Wish in the UK that has supported so many bereaved children, has brought it out. And it's a great conversation starter for you as parents to converse with your older children and the teenagers. So remember this, that more than anything, they want you to combine your little bit of competence with compassion. And when your hands are empty, to stay your ground and share that frightening darkness with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Brid. That was absolutely perfectly spot on. And also thank you to Lorraine and Amanda in the background, because anytime Brid was talking and making reference to different books or documents, they were as quick in on the chat function and on the questions and answers function with the links for all those things. And as I said, after this session, we will send you, not today or tomorrow maybe, but in the next week, you will get an email with a copy of the recording and the details of all the things that we've talked about in terms of resources. We have some questions coming in, which is fantastic. And we also had some questions that we emailed in advance. So before we launch into the questions, I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to look at a short video. And it's really, I think it's only a minute and a half, and it just summarizes in a minute and a half some of the amazing things that Brid has been saying. So I'm just going to share that with you now, and then we'll come back into the questions and answer session. Now, that was just a pause for a couple of minutes just to look at the key messages that have flowed through all the things that Brid has said. I know that we've got some questions that have come in, and we had some questions, and I think, interestingly, Brid, I like when you talk about how sometimes the things that children can say about death and dying, or the questions they can ask, can really blindside you as an adult sometimes. They can catch you off guard. They often don't ask you. They ask you, at a time when you're maybe not even thinking of that issue, And I think sometimes children make statements too that sound as if they're harsh, but actually they're really just working out the details in their head, and they've been mulling over things. And it's not that they're actually even asking a question, it's actually they're making a statement of fact.
Yeah.
So you'd often hear children, be very upset after, about the death of, say, their grandparent, and then very quickly turn around and go, but I'm still going to hang out with my friends at the sleepover, which sounds as if to adults, it kind of throws us sometimes. It can sound very cruel. Or other little children, maybe they've experienced the loss of a sibling, that would just turn around and say to the parents, oh, if I died, you'd have nobody. Now that can sound incredibly harsh, and it can really throw any of us in our grief. But I often think, sometimes we feel like we have to give answers to everything that a child says, whereas actually they're not actually asking a question in statements like that. They're not looking for an answer. They're really just mulling it and trying to basically get their own head around it, and then they come out with this. They suddenly realize this is a statement of fact rather than a question. And it's hard. I think those things throw
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's back to what I was saying. They think in concrete terms, so they're working it out in concrete terms. And the first one that you said, the sadness for grandmother, but then, well, I'm still going to do. And I think within Julie Stokes's book, she illustrates that beautifully, that, she talks about the swing. And there's a beautiful drawing of the swing and the land of loss on one side of it and the land of rebuilding on the other. And that actually the movement of grief is holding on and letting go. So letting go is, I'm going to go to the party or whatever is on, and holding on is, well, I'm going to remember Granny. So it's that piece, and there's a movement between the two, which goes right back to theories that we know of academically as the dual process model of grief. But it's a beautiful way of illustrating to children that there's a land of sunshine out there, that if we swing, and some days they will be swinging very fast on that swing, and in a statement like that, they're doing it rapidly. And other days it can be quite slow movement,
Yeah, and I suppose for parents out there to remember that, sometimes you won't have the answers. Sometimes there isn't an answer. And it's okay to say, to listen to your child and say, and just acknowledge what they've said, that like, and also I think, particularly younger children, like on primary school down, they are so literal. They really are so literal in the way that they think, in the way that they, and it's such a big deal for them to get their head around the whole concept of grief and loss. So it is like a series of, kind of cogs turning, I think, for them sometimes. They're like the different realizations come, and then they'll come out with a statement that sounds like very blunt, but actually it's their way of saying, oh, I get that now. I get that they're dead, and actually they're dead, and they'll never come back, And
that being literal is a very important one that we must remember. And as parents, we must remember to watch our language, because it's very important not to say that, Granny has gone on a long journey, or that, actually, Grandpa has gone to sleep. Because by doing so, we may actually be creating fears around sleep or going on journeys. Whereas if we actually use the language of dead and dying, and I know we find it very hard. I have heard many, many parents sort of say, oh, I can't use that word. But it's actually, children will use it and use it very quickly and have a huge use of language these days, and don't even think twice about it. No. And it's the same thing. I remember listening to somebody actually find it difficult to describe cremation to their children, who were in their early teens. And, you know, you think at that age, well, actually they're entitled to information. It was, oh, my father died, but I haven't told them, and it's 6 months since. And I was saying, well, you know, the Childhood Bereavement Network has a wonderful leaflet on it talking about cremation. And Elke Barber has a lovely book on it on terms of where's Daddy's body now. And I said, have a look at those first. And she came back to me and she said to me, she says, well, the conversation with the children wasn't a problem at all. She says, it was actually me. She says, I had made it complex.
Absolutely. That happens. Yeah, you're right.
I often do that already, Mom, you know?
Yeah.
It's happens, yeah.
That's so common. I mean, we hear that all the time, you know, that we overthink what the question means and how and what answers they might look for. And in fact, children don't need a big long lecture. They don't want, you know, a whole emotional big, you know, as you said earlier, that eyeball to eyeball conversation. They want the facts, they want the information, they want the specific answer. And sometimes they just want reassurance. They want reassurance to say, yeah, it is very sad, or yeah, that would be very sad. But, you know, these sort of things. But I think, yeah, like I know that a lot of people struggle with using using language that sounds harsh, and there's euphemisms like, oh, you know, they're at peace now, they're in a better place, sound softer to children. But we know that actually, especially for young children, they can cause a lot of anxiety, because when a little child hears, oh, she's in a better place, all they think is, why did she go to this lovely place without me? Why can't we all go to this better place? You know what I mean? So that's just the way their mind thinks. So actually being clear and explaining, and sometimes with little children, you actually have to explain what dead means. We can't assume they know what this means. And but that dead means the body doesn't work anymore, you know.
But nature teaches us that all of the time. And even if we just look at the cycle of the trees and just look at them from the time they come into bud in springtime, and the whole thing of coming into full bloom, and how the autumn colours fade, and then how the trees become bare again. And I often think when you're actually doing that with younger children, I've actually been able to say, and look at, we actually see much more when the trees are bare. And actually that's reality. We see more in our grief than we ever see when we're in full blossom. And I think it's actually that. So nature can teach us ways of actually talking about death to children in a very, very simple way, you know. And I think too, you know, I just see a query there, you know, that if, you know, when we hide our grief from the children, do we need to be cautious that we don't parentify them, i.e. that they may feel that they have to care for us in our grief at the expense of other parts of their life. And I think it's really important, you know, if we cry with our children, that we are actually explaining to them there's actually, you know, the times we used to laugh together and everything else, it's okay. The other side of the coin is that we can cry together. And actually, if we do so, you know, that actually it gives us a great freedom, you know, and nobody ever has to stifle their emotions in a family that can cry together, because and can laugh together, because, you know, it's okay to express emotions here. So you don't go around with your emotions blocked in. And I think that's a lot of the mental health issues that we're finding happening to young people, where grief is not getting expression and not being allowed to be talked about at younger age. It builds up until it becomes a volcano that manifests in other ways. And I think it's actually that piece of, you know, and I'm being able to say to the children, you know, I'm doing this because this is the way we should really live life, in an open way, that we do it emotionally too, you know.
And I think though, when children and young people are stepping up too much to protect the parent, when they are trying to kind of take on that sort of, I'm, you know, like, you're very upset, so I have to mind you role, I think we do have to stop and say, look, it's okay, we cry together, but you're not to worry about me. I'm the adult. I will get help for myself. I have people that I will get support from. I have friends that I talk to. I have whoever, you know, I will get help for myself, and I will look after myself. So you're not to worry about me that way. Just because I cry or get upset doesn't mean you have to carry that worry. But I'm still your parent, and I'm going to mind you. So I think that is an important one as well, because they like, and I mean, I love the one, I remember there was a young lad, and he said to us, you know, he didn't want to deal with his emotions the first few months. He was a teenager, didn't want to address it, just wanted to block it out. If I don't think about it, if I don't talk about it, it didn't happen. And Then a couple of months down the line started to hit him hard, and he really wanted to talk, and he was encouraged to talk to his mum about his dad. And he turned around and he said, there's no way I'm talking to her, because she's been a basket case for the first few months and she's only starting to act a bit more normal. And if I tell her what I'm thinking, I'm just going to set her off again. You know what I mean? So again, that whole, vicious cycle of everybody protecting everybody instead of just saying,
it's the game playing. It's the game playing.
There's going to be good days and bad days. I'm the adult and I will get through this. I'll get support. And, if you tell them you're going to get support, get support. And that support might be the pal who just takes over and gives you a break, or the pal who brings you for a walk, or it could be you might need to talk to somebody outside the family, but get support for yourself, but also let them know that it's okay to show those emotions, and that, some days you will be a basket case. That's okay.
I see another question here for me, which is, what can I do to help my child? She gets lots of coughs and colds, etc.
Yeah.
My daddy died by suicide and I can't get her better. And again, it depends on the age of the child. But again, it's the nurturance that is really being called for there in the coughs and colds, I think, in so many ways. And again, if you want signposting to perhaps the service that can be of more support to your child, again, if you get on to info@bereavement.ie, Maura will actually signpost you there to a service that can be of benefit, because we will actually be sending you out the contact details of those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one that came in advance, and I think it's an interesting one, and it's the whole, even if you in the family have, you as the adult have done as best you can to try and be as clear and as honest and give the child the information. The child is surrounded by other people and other adults who maybe talk to them about lots of different things. And so, for example, you talked about younger children and the magical thinking. We know that middle childhood, they're obsessed with these cartoons and movies where the superhero gets killed and comes back to life. We also know in a lot of the religious teachings, there's, especially around Easter time, there'll be the whole, Jesus died and
the resurrection
came back, the resurrection. And yet, on the other hand, we're saying be honest, use language that explains that dead means the body cannot work anymore, and that a person cannot come back from being dead. Because particularly younger children, they will fantasize about the person coming back, even if they know, I know they're dead, but they'll still come back for my birthday, or they'll still come back for Christmas. So, I think they can be very hard conversations for parents when they've told the child one thing, and then the child might come home from school and say, well, we were doing religion in school, and if Jesus came back, why can't daddy come back? And they're challenging. I think they're challenging. Would you have any advice for those type of conversations, Brid?
But I think actually the way I would often explain that separation of body and spirit is actually using a candle. And I remember doing it in a house once where there had just been a tragedy where dad had actually died. And mum was sort of saying, how am I going to explain this? And it's actually, if you take a lighted candle and you actually think of it, and the light in the candle is the essence of the person, the personality, what we see in life, who we are in life. And that actually when somebody dies, that is blown out, so we can't see it any longer. But in fact, we take the body of the candle for burial or for cremation, and actually the essence, the light that was there, has now become essence and spirit that goes to another place. And we can look, it depends on what belief is then in an afterlife or so on, depending on the cultural differences in society and our own views there. Okay, so it's that piece of actually being able to explain in that way. And actually the children really grasp it when we actually show it to them. I see a few more questions here, Maura, for me here.
Yeah.
Just sorry, they're
So,
actually
for the surviving parent who feels the child, for the surviving parent who feels that their child's needs support in dealing with their grief, what is your view on providing this in a one-to-one setting versus a group setting? I understand that young person's individual circumstances will be different, but what does the experience suggest is generally a better way of providing support?
I think a young person actually being able to benefit from group support can be really useful, but unfortunately that's quite limited at the moment. What we're looking at is if it's a sibling loss, they actually have access to Barrettstown is one where there's recreational activities and so on. Jacinta Smile also organises recreational activities for sibs who have lost a sib. So they are good because they take away the sense of it is only me and the isolation of that, and it actually is really helpful. So in fact, you know, and really the one-to-one support is more beneficial if you're actually finding that the young person is really getting stuck in an aspect of their grieving, whether it is that they're finding the loss of this particular individual in their life absolutely depleting, or whether it is that they're actually stuck in a point in their grieving. Maybe they are so extremely angry about the loss that they're stuck in their feelings, or maybe they have moved a little bit further along the journey of grief and just can't come out the other side into the real freedom yet, that they're really caught in a loneliness and have still got a disconnect. So that would be where I would see the one-to-one work working. But certainly the ideal is that piece of group work, but it's relatively limited at the moment, unfortunately, because of COVID. And there are some online groups happening. And again, I know there is somebody in North Kildare has done some drama therapy online with young people during COVID, and again, an excellent practitioner and has other drama therapists working with her, and it seems to be quite beneficial for children who have access to, you know. So
I mean, as you said earlier as well, we know that not all children that are bereaved need to go for external support.
Exactly.
But we kind of like, you know, if you feel that it would be beneficial and you feel that it would really help, you know, after you've given them a bit of time, because the initial stages, they just need, you know, it's too overwhelming to be immersed in it. But also even, and particularly if it's teenagers as well, I always think if an older child themselves is asking to talk to somebody outside the family, I think you have to respect that and help them find some space. But I think even if you do get somewhere for your child to link in outside the family, I think it's very important that within the family, you also try and build up some resources within yourself and some information yourself, because we know that your child isn't going to bottle up those emotions for that therapy session once a fortnight or whatever. They're going to be coming out on a day-to-day basis. And as Brid rightly says, very often it's the late at night one, you know, the going to bed one. They're going, so the more empowered you are, the more knowledge you have, the more support you have yourself around what's normal for your child at the age and stage they're at. The more you know, that's going to help in parallel if they get if they're getting involved in external support.
And I think that's really important for them, you know, because I think you know, as parents with practitioners, I think we are stakeholders in the outcome for the children. It's not a question of, you know, they go off to a service and that will fix them. It's actually, we work together, because there's no point in having your child who is actually getting streets ahead of you because they've processed their grief and you are still sitting, not having made the journey yet. So I often think where there's a parallel process happening, it can be really beneficial for family members.
Yeah, the outcomes are always going to be better, aren't they?
You know? There's a query here
about
my daughter too, who is 3, to her father's funeral recently. She now has a fear of any religious pictures, symbols, etc. Have you any way of helping her through this, please? I think that's more, it's almost like, I'm going to put it in another parallel of, it's almost like the Halloween symbols, if you like. It's almost, she now associates these church symbols with a funeral.
Pain.
She associates it with death as such, rather than anything further. So it's actually, from your own point of view, if it's an issue, I would say it's like taking the symbols out and actually discussing with them their true meaning to her, rather than what she has actually read into them now, because that's what she has actually done. It now associates with a time and a place, and something with it that doesn't feel good. So there's an emotional connection has been linked to these symbols as such, you know?
Yeah. I think the other thing particularly with younger children that's really helpful is sometimes they don't have the words to tell you really what they're worried about. but you know they're worried about something, or you know something is triggering them in some way. And trying to get them to tell you in their own words in whatever way they can. So, you know, trying to kind of create, instead of trying to ask them what they're feeling, because they won't have the words to tell you what they're feeling, but maybe say to them, you tell me the story of what you understand happened at Daddy's funeral, or you tell me all about what you think, what you remember from, or something like that, and try and get them to retell you the story in their own words. And that often will be a little window into maybe something that upset them, or some particular thing that's worrying them or upsetting them.
This is a 3-year-old, Maura, though, and I'm just thinking, you know, at 3, what I'm actually thinking of as well, you know, it's like the piece when we actually, you know, if we found ourselves pregnant, we notice everybody that's pregnant. And I'm thinking, actually, if you are thinking of death and you go into a church, how many religious symbols, be it the Stations of the Cross or the crucifix or so on, actually shows death in different ways and sadness. So in fact, I can see why that association could happen in a 3-year-old's brain. And yet hasn't got the language yet so I can see what the fear and the anxiety has come up, because she hasn't yet got the language to actually express the rest of what it means to her, you know. But it's now a link. So everything in that, you know, and it is, because I have sat in a church with children one day and I thought, there's so many symbols in the church that are actually so sad.
Yes.
In so many ways. And so to think that's a sad piece for children, you know. There's another one here. I'm a preschool teacher. A child in my class, the grandparent died suddenly last week. How can I support the child and their family? And again, as a preschool teacher, again, that very young age, I would suggest, again, the books like Invisible String, and getting them to be able to build a memory jar together, maybe for grandmother in a little while. A lovely one that I have used, and I suggest to people at this time of the year for Christmas, is a gratitude jar, which is literally it's literally a biscuit barrel, a glass biscuit barrel, and taking half of A4 card, folding it in half again, making little cards that say, I am grateful for, thankful for, and everybody puts in their little message of what they're grateful to Granny for. And it can be left on the center of a table at Christmas, or it can be left in a hallway at home, and people can draw from it or put more into it when the thoughts arise. And in fact, it's a lovely way of actually remembering Granny, but her essence joins people at that sad time of the year when it's very hard and we need more family connection as such, you know.
Yeah, and those type of things, those type of jars are a great visible way of saying, we talk about this in this house. We'll talk about, she's still here, we're continuing that bond, we're talking about her. I also think when it's a school or a preschool, one of the things that can be really helpful for a grieving family is them knowing that you are looking after their child for the period of time you have them, and that they don't have to worry about them. You know, so having that conversation with the family to say, look, we understand this is a really tough time for you. We've looked into some resources. We've got some information around how to support a child that young when they're grieving. We have her, or we're caring for her for the 6 or 4 or 3 hours that she's in our care. You look after yourself. Yeah. And that can be a great relief, knowing that. Yeah, isn't it?
So here, I think we have, I see we've got to the end of the questions here, I'm told.
I think we've one more. How do you deal with a 14-year-old who doesn't want to go to school, feels sick after a mother's suicide?
Okay, and that's really natural. I would honestly feel, and I think with suicide loss, I really feel a child like that at that particular age of 14, where you're starting out in a new path into secondary school, really does need access to a service like Pieta House or one of these that can actually give her the support she needs. And all it's about is normalizing what she's feeling, that somebody will do the psychoeducation with her, just what we've been doing tonight, but that she can go to a place that somebody can actually help her with that, so that she can then begin to gain the courage to go back. But I would definitely say early intervention in that case, and certainly with school refusal, and certainly with an agency that understands suicide law. So that's why I mentioned PH as such, you know.
And I think within the family, sometimes when there is a death by suicide, it can become such an all-consuming emotional turmoil, because you don't know, you don't have the answers of all, you don't have the answers for many deaths, but with a suicide death, you don't have the answers. And I think sometimes it's important, if you can, because it's tough, is to also remember how the person lived and not just how they died. Talk about how they lived and not just how they died. And I think that can be.
What strikes me in that is working with a young boy who was the same age, 14, who lost his sister to suicide a number of years back. And I remember, he quite distraught the first session and sort of saying to me, will you take in photographs of the two of you? Like, I mean, they had a great bond. And it broke his heart, even though she had a very stormy adolescence and that. And I will you take in photographs the next day so that we can have a look, if you'd like to, because sometimes they don't that early on. And he did, and there were these magical photographs of siblings together. And he spent the second session laughing and telling me stories. And then he goes, how can I be laughing and telling stories like this when I was so sad last week? And I was explaining that, this is exactly what grieving is like, that we are holding on and letting go, and we are on that swing between the good things. And by doing it, it's allowing the perspective in a young person to move beyond the event of the loss, which I think a young person can do much quicker than actually a parent, maybe in a similar circumstance, to actually realizing that there's hope beyond it and remembering then the good times. And, he was a young man that didn't need a lengthy amount of intervention professionally, and moved on and has done well out of it in that too. So it's that piece of when we normalize and we allow that connection to happen quickly with the good pieces. It's like, which piece do we emphasize? And it's like the story of, the American Indian chief that talked to his grandson after 9/11 of, there's two wolves fighting inside me. And the little fellow says, and which one will win, Grandpa? And he says, it depends which one I feed. So whether it's the sad thoughts or whether it is actually the good memories that I feed the most, that one will win, Okay. Yeah.
I mean, we have some more questions coming in. Okay. We have a minute or two more. Yeah. And then if we don't get to answer all the questions, you have our email, you can send them in and we'll try and respond directly afterwards. We have a couple more here, Brid. We've this one, how do we advise guiding a child exposed to the extended family's intense grief, where we have an open discussion at home, but the extended family have different ways of coping?
Yeah.
I mean, definitely
that's
grief
a big, that is a big one
within families. Yes.
And it's a big one. And I think you have to, and I know I have said it in the past to parents, even at the end of life, when they're talking to the children, of saying, you set together the script that you want to follow, and you set your own script for grieving within your own household, and the extended family will do it a different way. And it will, and I'm afraid, like when I'm working with bereaved adults and bereaved parents, I often say, there's a lot of hedge trimming goes on in grief, but we have to cut away the pieces that don't support us any longer. And I think as parents and as adults, I think the key thing is get for yourself, the doers, the pragmatists in your life, the people that will help you in that pragmatic way, the listeners, somebody that can listen to you, and hear you from time to time. And the recreational support, and the recreational in terms of somebody that will take you out of yourself and say, come on, you're going for a drive, or we're going to actually go and have a coffee today, and take you out of yourself for a few hours. But you need that in order to be the support, because you can't give from an empty well. So that's really important in it. But that tension is a huge one in it. And it's actually, you have to, I'm afraid there is a need to set boundaries in that at times, of saying, well, this is the way we are actually working through our grief. And I think, especially if we're still up against traditional styles of grieving vis-a-vis the more contemporary, we will have different ways of doing things. And it does. Like, I mean, I constantly have conversations with people going through grief and talking about, I'm going through this and it's going against the grain with me. And it's like, grief is unique to each and every one of us. So if you are the head of the household now, you set the way it's going to be done. And
Yeah.
you know.
And I think sometimes you just have to, you know, within families and extended families, just accept the fact and name the fact that grief is a very individual journey.
Absolutely.
We all have our own unique ways. I'm doing the best I can that works for me. You do the best you can that works for you. But when it comes to the children, it's within the family, you know your children best. You know, have to just, as Brid said, set your boundaries and say, this is the way this is what works for us. But then again, you'll see that even with different children in the same family, different children will respond and want different things and react different things, both immediately and then at times later on. Yeah, we've a couple more questions and we'll be wrapping up.
There's one here. I have a child in after school who has lost his brother. He never knew his father, but knows he had taken his own life a few years ago. He's now living in his grandmother's house. He doesn't talk about his grief. Any tips on helping him open up? It's interesting. I remember working with a youngster like that years ago who didn't know her father, but mum died when she was 3, and she went into complete school refusal at 10 and complete refusal of activities and everything else, was living with grandparents, mum's parents. And it was fascinating by sitting down, and she had gone through several agencies and nobody seemed to be just getting on top of it. And sitting down with her and actually putting together a life story book.
Yeah.
And you know, you might think, oh, this is going to be interesting. And I remember even having the thought in my head, this is going to feel a bit lopsided or something as we're doing family tree, but it wasn't, because her family tree was her grandparents and her uncles and her aunts, and she drew it. But then as we went along, she began to realize she had more memories of her mum than she thought she had. And then the key, if a child has had the loss that early on in life, is that often they actually build the memories of their lost parents through the narratives of others, through family members and through family friends. And her mum's best friend had kept contact all over the years and used to bring this little girl on holidays with her, and was a key piece in it. And it was beautiful, because she really, she finished with this amazing book. But I'd say within a session or two was back re-engaged with school and her activities and everything else.
Yeah.
And had come out of herself again. And sometimes, and our standards on supporting bereaved children in Ireland, the very first standard for children is that a child can feel heard. And I think that's the piece. If the child can feel that we hear them, and we as parents and carers, that's what we need to do to the children, is that we can hear them exactly where they are.
Yeah.
Because
and gathering up that story, pulling together that story is a way could be a way for that young lad to get the answers to the questions that he has always wondered about, and to engage and find out and build his sense of self around himself.
But it's almost the point of it, which is so important, is a bit like, who do you think you are? But it's the point of it is, what's his identity now? Because when we have been bereaved, that's the biggest question to us. We lose the person as we lost them. We lost the relationship there was, and we're left with the question, well, who am I now without them? And here's an identity question for young people. If we can give them the roots that they had, it allows them to find the wings to fly in the future. That's so we root them and we anchor them, and they can fly from there, you know?
Yeah, that's lovely. There's a question about group support around where there's been a death, a parental death by cancer. I know that some of the cancer organizations run programs. There's a program called Climb that Purple House and ARC and a few of the other organizations.
And quite a number of the cancer support centres around the country do and have been doing it all through COVID. Have a lot of those. So actually making contact to some of them, depending on what part of the country you're in. We can again signpost you to the part of the country you're in.
That's true. And I also think that sometimes when somebody has died, maybe, and has been linked to an agency or a society or a hospice, people feel that they can't go back to that place to look for some bereavement support. But most of those services have social workers and bereavement staff on, you know, in their services, and they absolutely are there. And if they haven't got something running at that time, they'll be able to signpost you to when the next program is running and so on. Brid mentioned earlier, actually, that's just probably a nice cue into, we collaborate with some of, we're the Irish Childhood Bereavement Network. We support and work with professionals all through Ireland who are working to support children who are bereaved. And one of our members is St. Francis Hospice in Raheny. And they've produced this really, really very good resource, especially for teenagers and young people, finding your way through grief. And it is a very good book. It's actually available free. They'll post it out to you for free if you just go on their website. We've made, with their agreement, we made a short little video highlighting some of the pieces in the book. I'm going to share that with you now. And then after that, we're going to bring the session to a close. Okay?
Thank you, Maura.
So finding your way through grief is this one. And I'll just maximize it. Did I put the sound on?
Finding Your Way Through Grief. A book written by and for teenagers and young people. We're going to talk about what young people think has helped them through grief. We hope it will help you understand how grief affects us and what can help. Grief is a natural part of coping with bereavement. There are no rules about how we should feel or how long it should last. There are no right or wrong ways to grieve. Grief has many faces. It can be a massive bundle of emotions. Everyone grieves in their own way. In the beginning, a lot of the time, I just wanted to be alone. But now there's more times I want distraction of my friends as well. Common responses to grief are shock, loneliness, poor sleep, feeling irritable, and lack of interest in things. Headaches, stomach aches, anger, and/or anxiety. You might feel you've lost your sense of safety and control over your life. What helps? Understand this explosion of feelings are normal. Allow them to happen. Stuffed down feelings do not disappear. It's okay to distract yourself from your grief and not to feel guilty that you are forgetting the person. If you feel guilty about certain things, especially at the end, remember your whole life with the person and not just the bad parts. Talk about your worries. It's important to talk, even though it's really hard sometimes. It's easier not to talk and isolate, but if you talk, you can get help. Feeling overwhelmed and anxious is common when grieving. Anxiety is the mind's response to a fearful situation. Identifying your thoughts can stop anxiety spiraling out of control. Remember, even members of your family will grieve differently to you. It's really important to be aware of how we grieve differently. Otherwise, it will affect relationships in the family in a bad way. Grief and anxiety can make looking after yourself difficult. When my dad died, I felt I couldn't talk to people. I let it bottle up and it got on top of me. Because I wasn't talking, I didn't really understand how I was feeling. I tried to cope in a very unhealthy way to relieve pain, which didn't work, and I just felt worse. Finally, I spoke to my cousin, and then I got the help I needed. You are who you are because of the lives that have touched you. The things you have learned from them stay inside you and become a part of you. As time goes on, you realize that no one is completely gone as long as you remember them.
So anybody that's interested in a copy of that book, St. Francis Hospice in Raheny would be more than happy to post out to you free. You just go onto their website, same France, sfh.ie. Oh, sorry.
It's up. It's up. She popped it up.
It's, we have a podcast.
There it is. Yeah.
Sorry about that. That's one thing. When we put things up on the YouTube channel, if you don't stop it, it automatically runs onto another YouTube project. So I was saying, oh, fantastic. Amanda and Lorraine have beat me to it. They put the link up, go on to their website, put in your details, and they will post that out to you for free. It's a lovely little resource. We've picked out just a few of the key messages from there in our little video of 3 minutes, but there's loads of other tips and ideas and suggestions. And it's a great resource for any family to have that have teenagers. And I know that a lot of people struggle with getting teenagers to talk. So it might be a really helpful little resource. And it's Irish and it's free and it's only just being printed. I think just to say thanks everybody for joining in. We had a great group in the audience, great number of attendees. It's great to see that this is meeting a need. Thanks to my chairperson, Brid Carroll, chairperson of the ICBN, and the backup team, Lorraine and Amanda, for fielding the questions. And I know that we picked up on some of the questions live, and I know that they've signposted lots of people with some other questions and answered those directly. They've been fantastic signposting the information. We will send you an email to anybody who registered. We'll send on an email with a copy of the recording, listing of all the resources we talked about, and copies of those little videos that we've used as well. If there's any other questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. And thank you for being part of Bereaved Children's Awareness Week and for reaching out to get some support to talk about this subject. And we're more than happy to have been here for you today. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
And we'll
Safe
just
journey.
put up a final holding slide with the website information and a link to a bereavement helpline. I think Lorraine is going to pop that up.
Yeah.
Or Amanda. There we go. See? That's fine. Perfect. We'll have a copy of all the questions and a copy of all the chat as well, so we can look at those afterwards, pick up on those, pick up on anything that hasn't been picked up on. It's just coming up to 9 o'clock, so timing worked very well.
Absolutely.
It needed the time though, needed the hour and a half, didn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Especially with the amount of questions that are coming in. Amanda's answering that question that's still live, so we'll leave her do that. Yes, I think we covered everything else, didn't we?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'll stop the recording now.